Thank you, Seth. Now, please join us in welcoming our moderator, Diego Sanchez, and panelists to the stage for our closing plenary, Lives on the Line, Fighting Anti-Trans Legislation in the States.
Baby, how you feeling? Head toss, check my nails. Baby, how you feeling? Woo, child, tired of the bullshit. Gone, dust your shoulders off. Keep it moving, yes, Lord. Trying to get some new shit in there. Swimwear, going to the pool shit. Come now, come dry your eyes. You know you a star, you can touch the sky. I know that it's hard, but you have to try. If you need advice, let me simplify. If he don't love you anymore, just walk your fine.
Hello, everyone. Well, many trans and non-binary people know that there's no mic here. I was sitting on the mic. It had a great time. Oops. I'm Diego. This is my mic for the moment. Well, many trans and non-binary people know that our lives are on the line every day. Our community and our families have never been so ruthlessly and aggressively attacked state by state than in this state legislative session. Of the more than 350 anti-LGBTQ plus state bills introduced, 197 of those were exclusively anti-transgender, overwhelmingly targeting trans youth in 35 states. 55 anti-trans bills were introduced in Texas alone. 9 states codified anti-trans athlete bills into law, and Arkansas's legislature passed a trans youth health care ban that would deny kids the gender-affirming, medically necessary care. Families of trans and non-binary youth also struggled with bills that criminalize their actions to support their kids' care by themselves or that done by medical professionals. In 2021, whether measuring by monthly calendar or the Transgender Day of Remembrance calendar, more women of color, trans women of color, have been murdered than any other measured year, mostly by people they know. We must work together to help my community, our community, live as long as others, as well as possible, the same as others. A less lifted beacon, though, is that in 22 states and the District of Columbia and the U.S. State Department, all of those honor a gender marker of X on at least some identity documents, helping our non-binary and gender non-conforming teammates. There are still states, though, that prohibit changing gender identity markers on birth certificates or other documents. So we will all keep working, already having the promise that the whole of our federal government will eventually honor the same. Right now, I have the joy of letting you hear from 4 experts, 2 elected officials, and 2 current professional activists and organizers. We are all transgender people on the front lines of these and other battles, finding some victories, even among the defeats. Let us get started on this shared learning experience by having each panelist give us an opening statement. That will be followed by a 40-minute moderated Q&A, and then we'll be delighted to take your questions. There will be microphones in the audience, and you will not have to sit on them. First, please welcome Representative Stephanie Byers, Kansas State House Representative for the 86th District. And all 4 of these people, by the way, have history markers of being first. Stephanie.
Chokma, Chin Chokma, hello, how are you? Chickasaw Saya, I am Chickasaw Indian, as well as being the first Native American trans woman ever elected to a state legislature in the United States. I began to live authentically in 2014, and I was transgender before then, as we all know. We don't change. The world around us changes when we decide to bring our authenticity to the forefront of who we are. And so I did that at a high school that I had taught at for 25 years. And I continued to work there for another 4 years until I retired in 2019. In 2018, I was selected as the GLSEN National Educator of the Year. Part of it because of the activism that when I began to live authentically, I also began to stand for not just myself, but for the trans community in Kansas. Whether giving speeches on the steps of the state capitol or in school boards, it was a passion that I had. In 2019 in October, GLSEN asked me to be the voice for educators and for students at a rally that was being held on October the 8th in front of the Supreme Court. So the same day that SCOTUS was hearing the oral arguments on Bostic versus Clayton County, I stood on a sidewalk and I began to speak about how that decision would impact LGBTQ students in schools as well as their teachers who were LGBTQ. In that moment, as I stood there with the U.S. Supreme Court building behind me and the U.S. Capitol building in front of me, I made the choice to decide to run for the House District 86 of Kansas. And in that moment, my life changed in so many ways. I was retired. I had no idea what I was about to do, but I began to enter into that. It has been a wonderful opportunity and an incredible responsibility and an awesome privilege to be able to be that voice for so many people in the Kansas State House.
Thank you so much for that. So inspiring. I'd now like to turn the floor over to Mariah Moore, who's the Executive Director of the House of Tulip and also the Senior National Organizer for the Transgender Law Center.
Thank you all. Thank you all so much. My name is Mariah Moore. My pronouns are she, her. I am a confident, unapologetic, badass, Black trans woman from the South who is a former sex worker, but more importantly, a sister and a friend, a leader that stands on the shoulders of so many, like Monica Roberts, Lorena Borjas, Sylvia Rivera, Marsha P. Johnson, Stormy Delivery, Miss Major, right? Aria Saeed, who's sitting in the audience, Diamond Collier, Emmett Schelling, Mateo De La Torre, and Jupiter Perez, and so many more. Andrea Jenkins, the blueprint for Black and brown trans folks who seek to make change and run for office. You know, my journey started a long time ago as a young queer kid who was seeking, right, the representation that I needed to find my path to my own liberation, right? I found a beautiful community of trans people in New Orleans, and it is because of trans women who were sex workers, trans women who were struggling every day to survive, but managed to still take care of community. Those are the leaders who got me here today. And so throughout that journey, I've been privileged to serve my community through my experiences that fuel my leadership, that inform the decisions that I make and the rooms that I enter and the messages that I'm able to share with people. Myself and Milan Nicole Cherie founded House of Tulip in the midst of a pandemic where we witnessed our communities be continuously underserved and overlooked. And because we know that if we all come together, we can create revolutionary change, we did just that. Yes, thank you. Louisiana has never had a housing program or an organization that was trans-led, that provides direct service, but we did that. And I would not have been able to do that without the amazing support and the role that I serve in at Transgender Law Center. And because of another Black trans woman, Raquel Willis, right, who did revolutionary work in the South through Black trans circles, who identified and amplified my leadership, I was able to access these spaces, right? And so while we all sit in this room, I'm looking at a bunch of empty tables. And in each of those empty seats, I just can't help but imagine the black and brown trans people who should be sitting in these spaces, who should be sharing their stories, right? Because we existed, right? Because we fought, because we sacrificed, you all are able to now sit here. And so I hope that in the years to come, that this incredible conference continues to grow and diversify, but also bring the people into the fold that will allow us to reach liberation. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mariah. It's now my honor to turn over the floor to Adri Perez. Adri is the director, he's the policy and advocacy advisor at ACLU Texas, and when I said those 55 bills in Texas alone, those were on Adri's shoulders. Please take the floor.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Buenas tardes.
I should have said their shoulders. I apologize. That's how you correct, by the way. Sorry.
Thank you. My name is Adri Perez. I am a queer, transgender, first-generation immigrant from El Paso, Texas. I currently live in Austin, Texas, unfortunately. Really, I think my story starts with the fact that I am a first-generation immigrant, right? My family came to this country, and they came to this country with a lot of hope and a lot of perseverance and a lot of hard work. And it is because of them that I am an activist. It is because of them that when I came out as transgender that I did not understand why that meant that I could not have the full lived equality and dignity as somebody else in the state of Texas. And we chose Texas to be our home. Granted, El Paso is not really Texas and is its own special, unique place. If you've never been, please go. And if you work for an organization that can give resources specifically to the border, also, please invest in border communities in Texas right now. El Paso, we were talking, I'm gonna, just a slight digression, because I also do immigration work and worked with LGBTQ asylum seekers for a very long time, and so many asylum seekers come to the country through El Paso. And it is a community that is underserved, it is a community that needs resources, and it is also a community where LGBTQ asylum seekers need to get out of immediately because the likelihood of their asylum case winning along the border is much lower than if they were able to relocate somewhere else in the United States. But aside from the work that I do with immigration bond funds on the border, I also am now the policy and advocacy strategist for the ACLU of Texas for LGBTQIA plus equality. And we spent much of the last year, unfortunately, twice as long as normal, as you may have heard from other people during this event. We spent 280 days in our state legislature, as opposed to the regular 140. With the exception of June, we had been in a constant legislative session, whether it was the regular or the first special session, the second special session, and finally the third special session, where they succeeded in finally passing one of the 75 anti-LGBTQ bills that they filed in the year 2021. And I think it was actually 50 anti-trans bills, not that it makes it any easier that it's 5 less than 55, because it is still a quarter of the anti-trans legislation in the country came out of Texas. And they got that bill no matter what, and they were gonna push for it every single day. And if they're still threatening now to call back a 4th special session to restrict gender-affirming care for minors, and even without the special session, they are still succeeding in some ways in cutting back gender-affirming care in the state of Texas. And so I come from a state that right now really needs everybody in this room to get their people to care about trans kids and trans lives. I come from a state that needs you to look around at the resources and the people that you can pull in to do the work that is needed, because there are a handful of us. I don't do this work alone. It's not only on my shoulders. One of the most wonderful executive directors of the Transgender Education Network of Texas is sitting right there in the light, which really helps me to call you out. Woo! We work in coalition, and I will get to that later in another question. But yeah, thank you all for being here today. Thank you for being here to listen to this conversation. I hope that you all make an effort to join us in the fight against this anti-trans legislation, because this is what our community is being called to do in this moment, and it was very intentional that we are here, and we need you all to step up.
Thank you so much. And Emmett, I didn't see you because I can't see, so very nice to have you always. I'd like now to introduce Evanilio Stafford, who's Justice of the Peace in District 12, Washington County, Arkansas, another distinctive state.
Thank you, Diego.
Justice.
Thank you. And thank you, Victory, for having me here. Yes, my name's Evelyn Rios Stafford, Justice of the Peace, Washington County. Justice of the Peace is equivalent to county commissioner in a lot of other states. As people might think, I'm not part of the judicial branch. I'm actually part of the legislative branch. And I am the first and only openly trans person elected to office in Arkansas history. A little bit about our county. We're actually one of the fastest growing parts of the country right now. There's 30 people a day moving to our region. And because of the University of Arkansas is there, the headquarters of 3 Fortune 500 companies are there, including Walmart. And it's a region that's experiencing a lot of growing pains. And part of that is that we are growing in diversity, which is a really good thing. But that's also caused a lot of battles over diversity and what equity looks like in our region. I first kind of got involved in local issues back in 2015 when my city, Fayetteville, Arkansas, was trying to pass the first LGBTQ inclusive civil rights ordinance in Arkansas history. And we won that battle at the ballot. Unfortunately, the state legislature had a cow over it and decided to make equality legislation on the local level illegal in our state. But I continued fighting battles, helping to get other pro-equality folks elected to office. We've had several openly LGBTQ folks elected on the local level before me, so I definitely stand on their shoulders. Some of the other folks that we have living in our county are the Duggar family from 19 Kids and Counting. And they have been funding and running anti-equality candidates that we have been working to defeat. So this has been going on for many years. With the surge in population, affordable housing has been a really big issue in our area, which we know is something that impacts vulnerable communities the most, including the LGBTQ community. And so I got involved from there, working as a commissioner on our public housing authority. And from there I decided to run for office. I wasn't originally planning to run, but another incredible candidate was running for this seat, an out lesbian by the name of Candy Clark. And during the campaign, she suffered a stroke and had to drop out of the race. And that's when I decided to step up and put my name in. And won the election with 67% of the vote. And really, when I ran, I wanted to focus on really local issues like housing. And had no idea that what I was heading into was being a really personal part of the battle over the 9 anti-LGBTQ laws that were introduced this year in the Arkansas legislative session. Because of my visibility as the first openly trans person elected in the whole state, our state lawmakers, called on me to help fight these bills from a personal level. And I'll talk about that, during our Q&A in a minute. But one thing I wanted to say is how important it is to me. Almost every week, I hear from a family, especially of a trans youth in our state, who tell me how important it is to see a successful adult trans person in a position of visibility, and how important it is to them and to their child to be able to see that as a role model and a possibility model. And that's part of what keeps me going all the time. And that's really beautiful, and it's so important to me, and it touches my heart so much to hear that.
Thank you so much. An amazing team of people. I had the great joy of reading into a lot of y'all's backgrounds, and there's so much richness. It's worth noting that, as you can see, this entire panel consists of BIPOC, trans, non-binary, or gender non-conforming elected officials and community leaders. And at PFLAG, we believe that the most powerful educator and influencer is people's stories. So we'll go in the order that we did initially, starting with Representative Byers. But what I would love is for you in a couple of minutes or so, tell us your story, that you haven't told, and describe your identity as you want others to know. And just as a tip, we have an Emmy Award. We have a double Emmy Award winner on this stage. We have someone who has a history of creating an Aztec-connected dance group in El Paso. We have someone who rides motorcycles on here, and we had someone who had the courage to clobber COVID by starting Safety for Trans People in a very difficult town. So let's hear from them directly.
So in the research, I'm assuming that I'm the motorcyclist. The high school principal that I worked with when I began living authentically called me into his office one time, and he sat down and he said, "I need to talk with you for a moment. Before your transition, Steve," my dead name, was a badass motorcycle dude. I'm going to tell you right now, you cannot be a badass motorcycle chick." And it was a very interesting discussion to talk about the differences and how a trans person is still the same person regardless, that when you begin to live authentically, I try not to use the word transition, but when you begin to live authentically, what actually transitions are all those relationships and people that have known you before. I've known who I am since I was in kindergarten. I'm the oldest of 5 kids, and my parents thought they had all boys. My mom asked me after I began living authentically one time, she said, "How long have you known?" I said, "Since I was very little." She goes, "Why didn't you do this earlier?" I said, "What difference would it make, Mom? I did when I could, because we were in the 60s. We didn't do this." She goes, "Well, you know why you have 4 younger brothers, right?" I said, "Yeah, because you and Dad wanted a girl." She goes, "Exactly." I use the pronouns she and her. My coming out speech, I'm a retired high school band and orchestra director. How many guys were in band or orchestra? Choir? So you understand how you had the same teacher for 3 or 4 years. When I began living authentically in the very first day of school, as I came in as myself, my band kids all came in and sat down on the floor. We don't get chairs out during the fall until we get through with marching band. But they all came in and sat down on the floor. I looked at them, I said, "Obviously, we've got to talk about something. Something's changed." And they all looked at me and went, "Yeah." It got really quiet, and I said, "Before you call me Mr. Byers, most of you just said B, that still works. But now if you're going to use a salutatory greeting of some kind, it's now Ms. Byers. Now let's talk about my goals." Because it wasn't a big lengthy speech, because that is me. That's my privacy. That's the reasons why all these things, that's me. It's how we interact with each other. And that's kind of where it started. And they were extremely accepting. I lost 1 student my first year. Just 1. Everybody else stayed at the largest high school in the state of Kansas. And it continued that way for the rest of the time we were there. What really brings me in is the opportunities that I was handed as an advocate to stand on those steps of the Kansas State Capitol and speak out against bathroom bills, to be able, like I said earlier, to go into a school board meeting room and talk with them about how do you work with transgender students, or to talk with teachers about how to be affirming in the classroom. That's all speeches. But when the opportunity came up for me to run for office, I realized that I could actually take a seat at the table and not just be standing outside the windows talking to people, and maybe can possibly make a huge change in law. That's where we stepped up. And as we get in more to this discussion, we'll talk about the same anti-trans legislation that we've seen in conservative states all across this country. It came to Kansas as well, and we'll discuss it a little bit further when we get there.
Thank you. Mariah.
Oh, I felt like I told y'all a lot. But anyway, in 2017, Mayor LaToya Cantrell, or newly elected Mayor LaToya Cantrell of the city of New Orleans, tapped me to be on her LGBTQ task force, and I so graciously went. And one of the things that I remember telling her is that, I'm going to be honest and radically honest with you, and if, I will oppose you, right? Because I'm not a person to be appointed to anything to just merely support and go along with what you say, right? And so we did some amazing work on that task force, and we identified gaps in legislation that, specifically and strategically left out marginalized communities of all identities and racial backgrounds. And so I was very, very proud of that. Then in 2018, I was talking with Emmett about my potential run for office in 2021, and a lot of people said in 2018, girl, that's a long time away. And so for me, I said, we've got to start now, right? We've got to start clearing a path forward now, right, so that we can claim victory in 2021. And so a lot of people were like, I still think that's too soon. But Emmett said, you should apply to the Victory Institute. And I was like, what's that? And Emmett told me, and I said, I don't think that they'll accept me. And I applied, and Mario and Sarah contacted me. And it was the first time that I had felt like, wow, this is the beginning of a journey to office, right? Because not only had they contacted me back to interview me, they were extremely excited because in that small amount of time that I had questioned whether I was good enough, they reaffirmed that I was excellent, right? And so, thank you. And so I was accepted into the Victory Institute, and I traveled to Minneapolis and learned amazing things about what it would take for me to run, what I could expect. And I took that back with me. And I also took back a family of people that I met, a newly found support system, right? And an opportunity to tap into folks who would become extremely valuable in my life. And I'm extremely grateful to the Victory Institute for the education that they gave me. And so in 2019, I continued to travel and make connections with people and still tell people about, I'm running for office in 2021. And they'll be like, girl, that's still a long time away. But the message was clear that I said that I was going to do something, and no matter how far away it was, I still made people understand that it was going to happen. Much like 1969, right? The Stonewall riots, right? We knew that liberation may have been a long ways away, and it's still some time away, but we knew that we were going to get there. And that's the same feeling I had about running for office and clearing a path and holding the door open for other trans and gender nonconforming people in New Orleans, but all over the country. And so I just completed a run for New Orleans City Council, and there were 14 candidates, and I ran in the most conservative district in New Orleans, which is District D. And out of the 14 candidates, I came in fourth, and I was the only woman, right? Thank you. I was the only woman to receive the percentage of votes that I did. I was the top fundraiser out of all the candidates, right? And it proved to everyone that we are viable. We know what it takes to lead, and we will do it. And so I'm not disappointed that I didn't win, because I know now from that race that victory is inevitable the next time, right? And so, yes, thank you. And so I know moving forward that the impact that I had on a local race, right? The inspiration, right, that we all are here, but the ways in which we show up empower folks who may be afraid, who may live in rural areas, who may not feel confident, right? They see us, and they know that they can make an impact, right? And I want you to understand that I listened to my sister on this stage yesterday from Mexico, and she said something that struck me deeply, is that every day that I leave my house, I don't know what time I'm coming home or if I'm coming home. And it doesn't matter what position I hold or what power I'm able to wield. We are in a constant fight for our lives. And so representation and visibility, but most important, allyship and camaraderie is vital for us to live and to thrive. And so that's the part of me that I want to share. I want y'all to know y'all need to get y'all together, right? And continue to bring folks with lived experience into the fold, all right? You cannot legislate for someone. You cannot legislate for groups of people if you don't also share a lived experience. Because what words are you using in your legislation that ensures that you grasp the full concept of the protections that they need? We talk about the Equality Act, but we don't talk about the fact that concessions were made when it came to the trans and gender nonconforming community. So at the end of the day, does the Equality Act really represent me? No. And so for me, it's important that I let you know that. You know, concessions have always been made when it comes to the trans and gender nonconforming community. But the trans and gender nonconforming community has never made concessions when it comes to showing up for our entire community.
Thank you so much.
I forgot the prompt. That was incredible.
Tell them about yourself.
About myself? I'm here because of you. Yeah, well, I met Mariah through doing immigration detention organizing work in El Paso, Texas, right after the second death of a trans woman in immigration detention that happened on the first day of Pride on June 1st, 2019. Her name was Joanna Medina, and she was denied medical care and was HIV positive. And the Immigration Bond Fund that I helped start in El Paso had been working with her and had been in constant communication with her, and so we were aware of when she came into the country, and we were aware of when communication went dark, and we got the news of her death several days later. And that was on the first day of Pride in 2019. And so that's how I met Mariah, through doing organizing work and bringing awareness to that death and organizing protests outside of the Immigration Detention Center in El Paso. And when I found out that the Victory Fund did a fellowship to help LGBTQ candidates run for office, I jumped on the opportunity, and the first person that I saw on the website was Mariah Moore, and I was like, oh, good. I know somebody there who's been through this that I can talk to. And I messaged you right away, and I wanted to have like an length conversation, and all you said to me was be yourself and speak to your heart, and that will get you into the fellowship. So thank you for always encouraging me to be authentic. Yeah, so I am maybe the only person on this panel that hasn't run for office yet, right? I hope to run for office one day in El Paso, specifically for city council, because I think local government is very important. El Paso is a city where my family immigrated from Mexico, and they to this day do not speak Spanish and don't have anything above a 6th grade education, but they were able to make a life there and buy a home and thrive in that community because it is such a beautiful and welcoming community that I truly believe, and I believe that I have the interests of the community at heart, but I also believe that it is a community that is willing to elect a trans person into the city council and not make a big fuss over it, I think in some of the ways that other Texas cities might. And that representation and being able to see that, I think in elected office will be very important for a lot of people, not just in El Paso, but in Texas. Because when I was growing up, and what first brought me to the Victory Fund, or Victory Institute, was the fact that I don't see people who look like me. In higher office. I don't see people who look like me at the Texas legislature as state representatives. I don't see them in the state agencies. There are a handful of trans folks who do this work in Texas that directly impacts us, and we are trans adults, but trans kids grow up to be trans adults, and they need people to look to so that they know that what is happening right now is just right now, that there is a future for them. I didn't know that I could work at the ACLU of Texas. I didn't know that I would ever be on a stage talking to all of you about these things. When I was 17 years old, there was no gender-affirming care in El Paso or in Texas. And now it is 10 years later, and they are trying to strip that back and take away the hope of tens of thousands of kids in Texas. And so, I mean, what brings me to the work is my own story and my directly impacted experience that I have to combat in this exact moment. And it is very difficult work. I can't believe that I am fighting the battle that I have been fighting for 11 years and that we're back here, right? But I remain strong and hopeful, and I dream of a Texas where we can actually work towards addressing the concerns of our community instead of fighting these attacks that are used as smoke screens, really, to distract us from the needs that LGBTQ people have in employment and in housing, in income inequality, economic insecurity. Like, I really want us to be talking about the real social issues, and there's no such thing as fiscally conservative and socially liberal. The policies that you pass impact our ability to pass social programs. Yeah. That's your fault. It's not just about segmenting LGBTQ people off to the corner and saying, we are going to fight for you to be able to change your name. That is important, but we also need homes and jobs and the ability to survive and feed our families and thrive as something other than just LGBTQ people. We are full people who live full lives, and we are more than this, though this is central to our identity.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Justice City of Stafford.
Thanks. I hope if it doesn't put us out of order, I'm going to tell the story about how my identity and my visibility helped stem the tide of some of these anti-trans laws. So, just kind of setting the stage, as I mentioned earlier, in this legislative session in Arkansas, there were 9 different anti-LGBTQ laws introduced, as there were in many states. A lot of these are, as we know, cookie-cutter bills that were introduced in multiple states, and they found legislators to put them forward, and most of them were ghost-written by a handful of groups, including the Heritage Foundation and the Alliance Defending Freedom and the Family Research Council, and those groups who basically ghost wrote these bills. And so it was the same in Arkansas. And a couple of these sailed through the legislature, including an anti-trans sports bill, one that allows doctors to discriminate, and the governor had signed both of those already. And then they were pushing forward this bill to completely ban gender-affirming health care for anyone under 18. And During the legislative hearings for that, the anti-equality folks were given all the time in the world to spread misinformation, fear-mongering, medical falsehoods, and things like that. And the pro-equality folks were given very little time to speak. In fact, a father of a trans youth he was given 2 minutes to speak. He refused to give up his time and his seat. And the Republican legislators had him arrested by the Capitol Police, which is a really horrible moment at our state capitol. Another lawmaker during those same hearings called trans youth abominations. And it was really damaging for the trans youth sitting there and their families sitting there during these hearings to hear all this horrible stuff. And they were demonizing the parents, they were claiming that they were negligent parents when they couldn't be further from the truth. It was the exact opposite. These were parents who cared deeply about their kids and who had trans youth and wanted the best for them. So it was a really lopsided debate in the legislature. And so my state representative, Nicole Clowney, felt that now that this had reached the governor's desk, that she wanted the governor to actually hear one-on-one from a trans person before he decided what to do about this bill. And to our surprise, his office agreed. This whole thing, it was a real whirlwind. Basically, I needed to drive down to Little Rock the next day to go meet the governor. But I made some phone calls because, I'm 48 years old. I'm pretty far removed from being a trans youth at this point. So I made some calls and I was able to talk the governor's office into letting me bring someone along with me. I brought along an 18-year-old by the name of Willow Brashears, who had actually transitioned in high school in Arkansas public schools and had received hormone treatments, which is one of the very things that this legislation would have banned. And so we met with the governor. We were surprised that they set a 30-minute meeting because we thought we were going to get like 10 minutes or something. And so we sat down with him, didn't really know what to expect. He actually was pretty receptive to us. He asked a lot of questions, which I was surprised at. I'm pretty sure that in his many years of life, that this is the first time that Governor Asa Hutchinson had ever sat down and had a one-on-one talk with a trans person in his entire life. And I think we helped dispel a lot of misconceptions because the other side had been making all these wild claims about, evil doctors performing surgeries on 7-year-olds and things like that, which are things that are not happening and never would happen. The meeting went long, which was really unusual because he had so many questions to ask. He didn't give us any indication of what he was going to do. I walked out of that meeting totally on pins and needles. I was reviewing all the answers that I'd given him in my head over and over again because I was like, oh, I should have, given a better answer to that question, and I forgot to say something, and what if I screwed it up for trans kids across Arkansas and other states too? And I was just, full of anxiety because this was the first medical bill in the country to make it to a governor's desk, and I felt like the stakes were high because other states might take as a cue from what Arkansas did on which direction that they should go in. So about a week went by, and I'm suddenly get a text message saying you should turn your TV on right now. And we turn it on, and the governor comes out and gives a press conference where he vetoes the bill. And not only did he veto the bill, but he gave a press conference explaining why he was going to veto the bill, which was unusual. And he talked about and I heard echoes of our conversation in what he was saying, which was like really weird, like watching the TV. I'm like, because one of the things we talked about, and I think one of the things where I got through to him was I talked to him about Governor, you know, Republicans are promote themselves as the party of limited government. And here you've got a Republican-controlled legislature inserting themselves in between doctors and their families, in between coaches and their sports teams, in between teachers and their students. Where's the limited government in this? And you know, when he came out and gave his press conference, he basically, I think the phrase he used was that it was a vast government overreach, and that the state didn't need to jump into the middle of every complex medical decision. And I think that is one area where, coming from two different sides of the issue, we were able to find common ground on this. And you know, unfortunately, the state legislature was very determined, and they overturned his veto. But now, thanks to some families of trans youth in our state, very brave, along with the ACLU of Arkansas and ACLU National, we're fighting it in the courts now. And I was there in federal court. Chase Strangio from the ACLU, really amazing, came down and argued the case himself, and demolished all of the state of Arkansas's arguments, basically. I almost felt embarrassed for Leslie Rutledge's attorneys because they were just on their back foot from the very beginning. And the judge went ahead and issued an injunction against the law from the bench, like right then and there. And it's going to be in court next year. The battle's not over, but very hopeful because it looks like the judges really agree that this is an unconstitutional law, because it doesn't ban these treatments, mind you. It allows them for cisgender youth. So really what they're banning is the diagnosis of being trans. But you know, I think that if it wasn't for running for office as a local official and having that visibility as the only openly trans person in the state, you know, I think some of this may have been a lot harder to do. And so I think having a seat at the table and having access to even be able to have those conversations, we see how important that is. You know, and I think that's, you know, a way that, a real illustration of why we need more LGBTQ elected leaders in our country, especially on the local level.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate everybody. We're now at a point where we're going to do Q&A. So I'm sure you have lots of questions ready. We have people in the audience from Victory with microphones. The way this was planned is I'm supposed to see y'all and tell them, and so the part that doesn't work is I can't see. So that's a struggle. If there's someone who can manage to find a hand and hand a microphone.
Hello? Oh, that's very loud.
Thank you. That's awesome.
Hi, I'm Aaliyah Bean, and I just want to say thank you for all being here and speaking. You're such an inspiration. And I guess my question is, you know, with this onslaught of attacks on trans and gender nonconforming folks and, you know, your lives on the line on a daily basis, how do you remain hopeful? How do you not let the cynicism and the burnout get to you? How do you do that on your own basis, and what recommendations do you have for all of us as we continue to do this work?
I'll go ahead and start. In Kansas, our governor vetoed the anti-trans girls in sports bill. And we were able to sustain that veto by one whole vote. One of the things that we looked at, and a lot of people don't even know that the ban on healthcare, affirmative healthcare for trans youth, that came to Kansas as well. It came in, what was it, January? Early. We found out the day they filed the bill. I'm sitting here looking at Brandon Woodard, who is one of my fellow legislators, and Susan Ruiz back here in the back, and my wife, Lori. Hi, Lori. Susan, Brandon, and I immediately went down to the press corps inside the state capitol building, and with Tom Witt, the executive director of Equality Kansas, and immediately got with the press. We pulled them out of their offices and said, do you know what's just happened? And we started right then and there to explain to them that what we are looking at is bullying against trans youth. It had nothing to do with healthcare. It has nothing to do with who can score the most baskets. It has nothing to do with who is fastest in the 50-yard dash. It has everything to do with bullying and erasure of transgender kids. And we went to bat that way. We always try to make sure that we put the focus on what's really going on. Because if we get caught up on whether or not we should have transgender people competing in the Olympics, that's going to be an argument that's going to go on forever. But when you look down at what's really going on underneath all of that and keep your focus there, don't let us be erased.
Hi there. So I've got the next question coming right back to you. In Georgia, we've been celebrating Native American Heritage Month. And in Georgia, the Atlanta Braves just won the World Series. And so, you know, ready to always go and take the conversation straight where it needs to go, I started talking with some of the Native and Indigenous leaders, and they started talking to me about how the chant and the movement of the tomahawk chop was racist and wanted to take that to the state capitol. But unfortunately, Black Caucus members felt like they didn't want to speak on behalf of the community, the Native and Indigenous communities, which I understood and agreed, but at the same time, there's so much work to be done to even bring those conversations forward. So what advice or ideas do you have for this group of international LGBTQ leaders on how we bring the conversations and stories of the Native and Indigenous communities forward?
We are all in this room not just leaders, but we're also allies. Because we start talking about intersectionality. I live at so many intersections, it's like a roundabout in Europe. But as someone who is Native American, you look for who are the leaders within those groups to be the first people to step out. And then as an ally, your role becomes that of support. How can we help you get this message across? How can we open the door for you? And in some places, it's much harder than other places. As a Native American person in the United States, one thing that we don't know, we truly do not know, don't have an accounting of how effective the United States government was in cultural genocide against Native Americans in the late 1800s and early 1900s. We truly do not know. When you see someone who is Native American, they're a survivor. You know, their parents are survivors. My great-great-grandparents survived being marched from Mississippi into Oklahoma in the 1830s. And the fact of those matters is that those leaders within those communities are the ones that we really want to lead the charge. There are some states in the United States that have absolutely no recognized Native American tribes. That's how effective removal was in the 1830s. And it comes back down to whether we're talking about CRT, we're talking about trying to make sure that people are teaching true history, and some of that's uncomfortable, but we got to make sure that that's happening so that people understand, so that when we do go to the office of the baseball team in Atlanta and say, listen, this is why you need to drop that moniker. Or where I taught at Wichita North High School for 28 years, the home of a mascot that is racist. And when you brought up why we need to change it, I mean, I was on the inside trying to change it for 28 years. And when you bring up, people talk about, oh, but we honor the Native American. Oh, but we do this. Oh, but we do that. It takes forever to get someone to understand that cultural genocide impacted the very people that you say, well, I've got friends who are Native American. They have no problem with the R word. Well, they have no problem because generationally, that's what they've grown up with. And there was a point in time when having a negative stereotype was better than being invisible. You know, and I think many of us in this room understand that. And so it is finding those leaders, having them step forward and being there as a support. And if there are not people that are there, then relationally, sit down and say, I, as a person of this ethnicity or of this race or of this gender, I understand how this would impact someone else. And some of those voices don't want to be loud, but they will be thankful if we can make those changes.
Hello, everybody. My name is Andrea Jenkins. I don't have a question for you guys because I know you all do emotional, physical, mental labor every single day, all day. I got love for y'all. When I came out 30 years ago, I never, ever even imagined that I would see a panel of trans, non-binary, queer, women of color, people of color on a stage talking to other people. So it just, to say warm my heart is a complete understatement. I met and fell in love with Mariah in 2018. They came to Minneapolis. I've been supporting her campaign ever since, and I will be supporting her next campaign, as will all of you. And continuing to make sure that we're lifting up and supporting trans, non-binary, women, men, people of color in their quest to lead in this nation. So I just want to say thank you to all of you guys.
Thanks back
And
at
I would
you,
like
sister.
I would like
Thank
to
you.
respond to Andrea and say everyone should give her a round of applause for the way that she led through the George Floyd uprisings in Minneapolis.
Yes.
It is because of her existence, along with so many others. When we talk about seeing ourselves reflected in the spaces that we want to enter, it is real. And I want to let you all know that when you open doors and then you close them behind you, you are part of the problem. And I was so depressed after I did not win because I felt like I had failed. But one thing she told me was, when we run, we win.
Yes.
And by being here this weekend and receiving the love that I've received, I know that we are winning, right? We are encouraging, we are clearing a path forward, right? There are so many young people after seeing the races that we run, no matter the outcome, that will say, because they did, because she did, I know I can. Because she knows what it's like to face housing insecurity, right? Having barriers to access public transportation, right? Experience extreme violence, right? Because she knows and she speaks to that, no matter what room she's in and no matter how uncomfortable it makes you, I know that I can. I listened to our international leaders, and I was so struck because the problems and the issues and the disparities that we face here in the United States mirror for trans people, mirror what they're fighting for. And so I wish that they could understand, or someone could translate that I love you unconditionally. And they should have translation in this room. I love you unconditionally. And because you're fighting, you make this world safer for me, right? And because I'm fighting, I make this country safer for you. And so we are in this together. And you all have a role to play in every room that you're in. So when you're entering these rooms, make sure that you're bringing along folks who are marginalized, who do the work every single day. You make sure that you're leaving that door open for them. You make sure that you're donating to grassroots organizations. You make sure that you don't speak to anything that you can't speak about publicly. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have time for one more question.
All right, I'm gonna put y'all on the hot seat a little bit. So one of the things that we are seeing and we are dealing with right on the advocacy end within the LGBTQ communities is we're dealing with CRT, trans issues, LGBTQ issues, all being lumped together, right? And I know for myself, for y'all up in the stage, you understand how those all come together. So I want to hear from y'all how you think trans people, I'm a little biased, so how trans people are uniquely in these positions right now to speak about what this looks like, to reach people, to put that connection together. I want to learn from y'all.
I can go ahead and go first because that is definitely a big issue in Arkansas and where we're at. These groups, I think they call them, they've organized under sort of an AstroTurf label called Moms for Liberty. I call them Moms Against Literacy. But we have an out school board member where I live, she just ran for re-election in the middle of all this and won. And there was a surge of people coming out to vote. I knew friends who were like, I don't even have kids, but I'm going to vote in the school board election. I'm like, you should vote no matter what, because voting in school board elections isn't just for parents, because this is the future of our society here. How young people today get educated affects all of us, whether you have kids or don't have kids currently in school. But the secret that she was holding during the campaign is that her partner was about to transition. And she did not feel, they held off on being public about that until the campaign was over, because there was such, there was such a whirlwind of, a toxic stew, basically, around that. The anti-trans stuff, the anti-CRT stuff, and all that, all definitely mixed together. I would say one thing is, from the experience that we had in Arkansas, with the bills happening on the legislative level, is that the families of queer youth, who previously may have been isolated sort of in their own communities, maybe they had family and friends who were accepting and understanding, they weren't necessarily connected to each other in other cities and other parts of the state. And now they are. Now they are, because this battle has brought them together, and they are organized, and they're angry, and they're ready to fight, and they're ready to step up for their kids. And that's an amazing thing. This summer in Fayetteville, Arkansas, one of the local churches put on the very first queer camp for queer youth. It's a LGBTQ accepting church, and that that's the silver lining to all this is that those sorts of things, people are realizing how important it is to support these young people, these families, and everything else. And so our side is definitely stepping up to fight.
Thank you so much.
Can
I
say
definitely
something?
want you to answer. I want to say this was one of the questions that I prepared folks for that we didn't have time to get to. So I was going to say, I bet Audrey has something they would like to say.
This anti-LGBTQ book school board attack is built on history, a very long history of no promo homo laws, right? Some of which are still in the books in Texas, and in several states across the country. They wanted to prohibit people from talking about gay people. They wanted to prohibit people from talking about lesbians and bisexuals. The entire LGBTQ community at some point or another has been an individual target of this exact same law that we're seeing right now that is directed at books that teach people about gender and or their bodies, as though we're not supposed to know those things anyway because we're all humans. And those anti-LGBTQ, sorry, I'm very passionate about this, laws built on the anti-CRT laws. The anti-CRT laws built on the anti-masking laws because we were in a pandemic where there was a lack of information. And when there is a lack of information in a community, that is when conspiracy theories boil to the top of people's minds. Because that anxiety from not knowing what is going on feeds into a feedback loop in your brain where you will pick up on anything that makes somewhat of a semblance of a sense because you need to find a way to rationalize it. And this is all backed by organizations like the Heritage Foundation and the Anti-Defamation League that have millions of dollars poured into research about what messaging they can use to divert support away from the LGBTQ community when we know broadly that that the country supports non-discrimination protections for all LGBTQ people, including transgender people. And so this is a call to action also because the messaging that we have for 2020 and for 2021 for these bills was not working. The messaging that was funded, that did have money poured into it, was not speaking to our individual constituencies in the states in the South, like Arkansas and like Texas. And so we need funding for that exact purpose so that we can reach our communities and fill in that gap in lack of information that the far right is using to take advantage for their political platform in this exact moment.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to tell you what. We're going to take that fire of a Texan to the fire of yet another Texan, which is we would like to bring to the stage Mayor Parker, please.
What a great panel to end the conference on. Let us thank them. I trust that there are many of us in this room that know the privilege we have when we walk out of here that not everyone in this room has. And we thank you for the messages. And let me thank all of you for coming out after 2 years and joining us for this conference. And that as long as we don't have a super spreader event, that the fact that we are all vaccinated, that we were adults and willing to be respectful and polite, and no one had a meltdown over the fact that you had to show a vax card when you got in. How hard is that? Why can't we do that back in Texas? I'm not sure. I have quick messages. One, this, of course, is an annual conference, and we will be back next year. So make your reservations, put it out on your calendar. The first weekend in December, which I think it starts November 30th. Yes. Mark it down now. And those of you who are elected officials or who hope to be elected officials a year from now when we come back, make sure that Thursday is on your schedule for we will of course have an elected officials only day, and of course, and then we begin the conference on Wednesdays with our international folks. So make sure you mark it off. Next message, we're still trying to auction off a Toyota RAV4, all of which goes to the Victory Institute, and let me just say that right now I'm the winning bid, and it is not a raffle, it's an auction, and my wife's sitting over there, and unless you want her really mad at me, someone needs to put some more money in. The current bid is $29,000. The value of the vehicle is $37,000. And all that money goes directly to the Victory Institute and can support this event. next year. So we hope that you will do that. For those of you who don't know who's responsible for the ultimate coordination of this activity, Mario Enriquez. Mario? Yay! Where is he? Over in the corner over here. Absolutely fantastic job. Some of you will be attending the Victory Fund, completely different organization, the Victory Fund Gala this evening. It is at the other Marriott Hotel. If you're, just so you know, it's at the Marriott Marquis. Not here. Don't be confused if you're wandering around looking for it. Now, look around the room. Think about who's not here and you wish they were. Think about who we've missed over this last year. And remember that you're all important, but you're not special. This is about coming together, each of us, understanding, we're elected, we have important jobs, we're appointed, we have important jobs, we have great work to do, but we all suffer, we all hurt, we all need each other. This conference is about bringing all of us together to create a framework to lift all of us up. There is a proverb I heard, and that, and if you think about it, spider silk is very thin, very delicate, but it is the strongest natural substance. If you take one strand of spider silk and another strand, you can hold up the whole world. So let us do that together. Thank all of you.